Walmart sells more watches than almost anyone on Earth, and the 7 watches in this video are some of them. Nobody treats a single one of them like it matters. One of these 7 was built by a company you already trust with your money, and Walmart put its own name on the dial where you'd never think to look for it. Another is quietly listed twice on the same website, once for $15 and once for nearly $300. You are about to walk past both of them without noticing either. Number 7, Olev's. Search Olev's, and the brand's own website tells you it was born in 1999, in the heart of a bustling metropolis, a visionary dream taking its first breath. It calls itself a luxury watch brand. Master watchmakers, it says, pour their expertise into every timepiece. Sustainability, craftsmanship, the full script, told with the confidence of a company that has earned it. None of that survives contact with the actual watch, and none of it needs to if all you want is a good-looking dial for $40. But it is worth knowing what you are reading before you believe it. Olev's makes dress watches that look, from 3 feet away, almost identical to a Movado museum. Same clean, uncluttered dial, same oversized single dot standing in where the 12 o'clock marker should be, same ultra-thin case profile, same absence of visual clutter. This is not an accident of design convergence. It is a decision, repeated across more than 50 active models, aimed directly at a silhouette. A much older Swiss house spent decades building into something instantly recognizable on a wrist across a room, a dial so minimal it has practically become shorthand for restraint itself. That kind of visual reputation takes generations to earn, honestly. Olev's skipped the earning part and went straight for the look. So, which is it? A heritage Hong Kong watchmaker with a founding story from the last century, or a company copying somebody else's most famous dial? The honest answer sits somewhere uncomfortable. Independent reviewers who have strapped these watches to their wrists themselves, not the ones paid to write glowing copy, place Olev's next to Casio and Invicta, not next to Tissot, not next to Orient. Brands with real in-house movement pedigree, decades of documented manufacturing history, factories you can point to on a map. The quartz keeps time within about 20 seconds a month, which is normal, unremarkable, and entirely fine for a watch at this price. The stainless steel cases hold up to daily wear without complaint. What isn't fine is the story printed on the About page. A story built to make you believe you are paying for heritage you are not getting. There's a strange irony sitting underneath all of it, too. Olev's trademarks registered across more than 40 countries, from Switzerland to Germany to Japan, according to the company's own filings, a level of international paperwork that most 25-year-old fashion labels never bother pursuing at all. That part is real and verifiable. It just doesn't prove the founding story attached to it. A trademark office checks whether a name is already taken. It does not check whether the metropolis in the origin story ever existed the way the copywriter described it. And that, oddly enough, is the gold mine, if you already know how to read it correctly. Strip away the invented founding myth, and what remains is a $40 watch that photographs like a $400 watch on a video call. Nobody on a Zoom meeting is checking your case back for a movement code or asking which factory in Guangdong assembled your dial. They are looking at a face that says, correctly or not, that you thought carefully about this. I keep coming back to how brazen the founding story actually is. Most budget brands don't bother inventing a heritage at all. They just sell the watch on price and let the price speak. Olev's invented one, and it worked well enough that shoppers now repeat the 1999 Hong Kong story in their own reviews without ever questioning where it came from. Would you wear a watch that copies a design you love, knowing exactly what it's doing? Olev's sells you a story about who made it. The next brand doesn't bother telling a story at all, because the truth would give away how many other brands it secretly builds too. Before we move on to the next part, let me tell you this. Most people don't realize this, but buying a watch the wrong way can cost you thousands, and you won't even notice it until it's too late. That's why I created a complete insider guide to buying watches. The goal is simple. I'll help you stop guessing and start buying smart. You'll find the guide in the pinned comment and description. Now, let's move on to the next part. Number 6, SKMEI. Here is what almost nobody buying a SKMEI watch on Walmart's marketplace understands. They are not buying from a watch brand in any traditional sense. They are buying from a factory that also happens to sell watches under its own name, alongside a client list of other names it would rather not advertise. Guangzhou SKMEI Watch Co. started small. In 2004, it was little more than a contract assembly operation, doing piecework for larger manufacturers, learning the trade, one order at a time, on a factory floor in Guangdong. By 2009, the company had registered its own brand name for the first time. By 2018, it had earned Alibaba's Super Factory certification, a designation reserved for manufacturers capable of serious, sustained volume rather than boutique runs. Today, the plant can produce up to 300,000 watches a month, spread across more than 3,000 active product codes, sold under the SKME name in over 160 countries. And separately, quietly, built to spec for other companies whose branding never mentions SKME anywhere on the box. Sit with that for a second. The plastic-cased digital watch on Walmart's marketplace, carrying some name you have never once heard of, priced within $1 or $2 of the SKME-branded Model 3 listings down? There is a real chance both rolled off the exact same production line, wearing two different logos, sold through two different storefronts, priced by two different sellers who may not even know they're competing against the source. This didn't start as originality either. Early SKME catalogs leaned hard on the Casio G-Shock silhouette. Chunky resin case, oversized buttons, sport styling clearly modeled on a far more expensive watch most buyers couldn't afford. But a factory that copies today is the same factory selling 3,000 of its own designs tomorrow. Scale bought it Room. Room bought it the freedom to stop imitating and start iterating on its own terms, which is roughly how most manufacturing dynasties begin, whether the watch world likes to admit that lineage or not. The uncomfortable part isn't that SKME is cheap. Cheap is the entire point of the brand, and at $12 to $25, it delivers close to what you'd reasonably expect for that money. So does the store manager, in a sense, running a shop where half the merchandise came from the same warehouse under different labels. The uncomfortable part is that dozens of storefronts on the same website are quietly selling you the identical object. You are not really comparison shopping between brands anymore. You are comparison shopping between markups. I don't think that makes SKME dishonest. I think it makes the entire budget watch aisle a great deal smaller than the shelf makes it look. And it isn't just watches carrying other names. SKME has grown a smartband and smartwatch division alongside its analog and digital lines in recent years, chasing the same crowded segment as far bigger names, which tells you something about how far a factory can stretch once it stops thinking of itself as a knockoff shop and starts thinking of itself as infrastructure. There's a second layer worth knowing too. SKME has spent years chasing certification most budget factories never bother pursuing. ISO 9001 quality management, plus BSCI compliance auditing labor and safety practices on the floor. That paperwork doesn't make the watch feel more expensive on your wrist. It does mean the $20 digital watch under an unfamiliar name went through more formal inspection than plenty of shoppers assume a $5 import ever gets. Somewhere between copy of a G-Shock and 3,000 SKUs sold in 160 countries, the factory quietly became something closer to an actual manufacturer than a knockoff shop, even while most of its customers never learn its name at all. SKME hides behind volume and behind other people's storefronts. The next name on this list hides behind a sport it has never once had anything to do with making. Number 5, US, Polo Assen. The United States Polo Association has existed since 1890, governing an actual sport played on an actual horse, with real rules and real championships. It has never made a watch in its history. It doesn't need to. In 1981, the association spun up a for-profit licensing arm, first called USPA Properties and later folded into USPA Global Licensing, whose entire job is renting the Double Horseman logo to manufacturers who pay a royalty and handle everything else themselves. Watches sit alongside dozens of other licensed categories: shoes, luggage, sunglasses, even home furnishings. The production itself happens through third-party manufacturers, mostly across Asia, working from brand-style guidelines rather than in-house design teams. That arrangement isn't unusual on its own. Movado runs the identical model for Coach and Tommy Hilfiger, licensing its manufacturing muscle to fashion houses with no watchmaking history of their own. But it does mean a US Polo Assen. The watch is only ever as good as whichever factory happened to win that particular product line's contract that particular year, with no consistent in-house standard sitting underneath the logo. Here's the part that actually matters once you're standing in front of one. Price tag in hand. Below roughly $65, the case is typically zinc alloy, finished with a PVD coating designed to pass as stainless steel under store lighting. A simple magnet test gives it away fast. Real 316L stainless is only weakly magnetic. The cheaper alloy pulls hard and obviously. Cross that $65 line though, and the case construction quietly shifts to genuine 316L across the collection. Sapphire crystal shows up almost nowhere in the mainstream lineup at all, reserved instead for the rare, limited collaboration that most shoppers browsing Walmart's listings will rarely encounter. There's an easier tell than a magnet too if you don't happen to be carrying one in the checkout line. Weight. Zinc alloy is noticeably lighter than 316L, stainless of the same dimensions. A difference your wrist will register almost immediately, even if your eyes can't tell the two apart under store lighting. Pick up two US Polo Assen, watches of similar size, one from each side of that price line, and the heavier one is very likely the real steel. So the Goldmine here was never really the brand name. It's the invisible threshold sitting underneath it. Buy under the line, and you own a costume built to resemble something sturdier than it is. Buy at or past it, and the same double horseman logo sits on a watch built to an entirely different specification, often for maybe $30 more than the version standing right next to it on the shelf. A collector on Watch You Seek summed up the confusion years back, initially mistaking a US Polo Assen chronograph for something with real Swiss pedigree, before another forum member gently set him straight. It's a house brand, manufactured across Asia, priced at a level that has nothing whatsoever to do with a horse or the sport it borrows its name from. The licensing arrangement itself is worth pausing on, because it explains more than the case material does. USPA Global Licensing pays taxes and royalties back to the actual Polo Association, which uses that money to fund collegiate teams and maintain historic fields. So every purchase does support a real sport, in a roundabout, unglamorous way most buyers never think about, while they're comparing a $19 clearance rack watch to a $70 one 2 shelves over. The confusion isn't really about Polo at all. It's about a 130-year-old governing body renting its own credibility to whichever factory bids the contract, year after year, watch after watch. Real question. Have you ever bought a watch for the logo and only later checked what was under it? That one hides a threshold you have to cross with your wallet. This next one hides a price tag that makes no sense until you see the same watch listed twice. Number 4. Casio. The CA-53 was. Forget the F91W for a moment. Everyone has already made that particular watch the entire story of budget Casio, and honestly, the story is worn thin by now. The CA-53W deserves its own chapter, and Walmart happens to be exactly where its strangest secret sits, hiding in plain sight on the very same product page. The databank calculator line traces back to 1983, when Casio's CD40 introduced an odd, useful idea to the wristwatch world. A watch that could also store a name and a phone number, arriving one generation after Pulsar tried something similar and mostly failed to make it stick with consumers. The CA-53W followed a few years later, built around an 8-digit calculator, a stopwatch accurate to 1/100th of a second, and a calendar programmed clear out to the year 2079, all packed into a 42mm case that weighs less than a single AA battery sitting in your hand. Casio kept expanding the concept for years afterward, adding a schedule function, then world time, then an early phone dialer nobody under 30 has ever seen in person, then a keypad that glowed in the dark. The CA-53W stayed simple on purpose while its siblings got stranger. That restraint is exactly why it outlived almost all of them. Here is the part worth slowing all the way down for. Search Walmart.com right now for that exact same watch, model CA-53W1, and you will find it sold directly by Walmart itself for $14.99. Keep scrolling, and a third-party marketplace seller lists the identical model, same calculator, same stopwatch, same everything down to the strap, for $285. Same watch, roughly 20 times the price. Nothing separates the two listings except which storefront you happen to click on first. That gap isn't a typo, and honestly, it isn't really about Casio at all. It's about what happens the moment a fixed-price retailer opens its platform to third-party sellers who set their own numbers, competing for the same search results as shoppers scroll past without comparing listings line by line. The CA53W became a minor pop culture fixture over 4 decades precisely because it was supposed to be the cheap, honest option. The calculator watch a kid saved up $8 for back in the 80s, worn as much for the novelty of doing arithmetic on your wrist as for telling time, finding it repriced at nearly $300 on the same website, under the same photograph, is about as close as this list gets to an actual magic trick. The Goldmine isn't the watch itself. The watch has hovered between $15 and $45 for years and will most likely stay right there. So the Goldmine is knowing enough to scroll past that first listing before you buy. Casio's own site still sells the CA53W directly too, alongside colorway variants in white and olive green, which makes the marketplace markup even harder to justify once you know it exists. There is no rarity here. No discontinued run, no collector premium earned through scarcity. Just a 40-year-old design that some sellers have figured out shoppers will pay almost anything for, provided the listing looks confident enough and the buyer never checks a second tab. That's a pricing trick hiding inside a website's own search result. The next brand's secret is buried 40 years deep inside an actual sporting event most people have heard of, but never really thought about. Number 3. Timex, the Ironman. In October 1984, a Timex product manager named Mario Sabatini flew to Kona, Hawaii, with 1,500 watches packed into his luggage. He wasn't there on vacation. He was there to sell them, one at a time, to triathletes arriving for a brutal new endurance event that barely had a household name yet. Each watch cost $34.95. By the end of the week, every single one was gone. That watch was called the Timex Triathlon, and its success bought Timex something no marketing budget alone could have purchased: a direct line into the event itself. In 1986, the company licensed the word Ironman outright and rebuilt the watch entirely around it, water-resistant to 100 meters instead of 50, styled in a black, orange, and gray colorway, inspired by a car spotted parked outside Timex's design office. Industrial designer John T. Houlihan oversaw both the original Triathlon and this new version. The rebuilt Ironman sold more than 400,000 units in its first year alone, a number that still holds up as remarkable for a $40 sports accessory. Here's what still catches people off guard. This wasn't some fashion accessory borrowing a sports name for a little borrowed credibility. Timex built the actual instrument endurance athletes needed on their wrist. Lap memory, multiple alarms, a countdown timer built for transitions between swim, bike, and run. The sponsorship came second, earned by a product that already worked, rather than bought first to disguise one that didn't. Indiglo backlighting arrived in 1992 and became the watch's after-dark signature, glowing electric blue at the press of a single button, a feature so identifiable that it eventually spread across roughly 2/3 of Timex's entire catalog in the years that followed. 40 years later, the Ironman badge still sits on Walmart's shelves for under $50, largely unchanged in spirit from the watch that sold out of a suitcase in a Kona parking lot. Most people who buy one today have no real idea their $40 sports watch carries the actual licensed name of the race itself, negotiated directly with the people who run it. Not a marketing flourish somebody dreamed up in a boardroom decades after the fact. An earned partnership, decades old, still printed plainly on the dial. I think that's the part worth sitting with a little longer than usual. A watch built to survive an actual Ironman doesn't need to say much about itself beyond the name on its face. It just needs to still be running, reliably, 4 decades on. This one still is, for anyone willing to check. There's also a quieter number worth knowing. Timex has sponsored the Ironman World Championship continuously since that first Kona trip, which by now stretches back nearly 40 years, longer than most corporate sponsorships in any sport survive before somebody gets bought out or a contract quietly lapses. That kind of continuity is rare enough on its own. Paired with a $40 price tag, it starts to look less like a coincidence and more like the actual point. The original 1986 case color came from something almost accidental. a pewter gray automotive paint finish inspired by a car parked outside the design studio applied to a watch case rather than a hood. Timex has reissued that exact shade more than once since. Most recently, as a nostalgia release aimed at people who wore the first one on a training run decades earlier. The design team behind it, led by the same Houlihan who shaped the original, still gets consulted on those reissues. An unusually direct thread running from a parking lot in the 1980s straight through to whatever's sitting on a shelf near you today. Timex earned its name honestly, one Kona parking lot at a time. Bulova's chapter is different. A piece of engineering so quietly advanced that most of its own owners never learn what's actually ticking under the dial. Number 2, Bulova. Somewhere inside a handful of Bulova watches sitting on Walmart's marketplace right now, priced well under what a department store charges for the identical model, there is a piece of engineering that has no business being that inexpensive. It's called the Precisionist movement, and Bulova unveiled it at Baselworld in 2010. Instead of the standard two-pronged quartz crystal ticking away at 32,768 vibrations a second, the number sitting inside nearly every quartz watch on the planet, the Precisionist runs on a three-pronged crystal that twists like a tiny tuning fork rather than swinging back and forth in the usual way. It oscillates at 262,144 times a second, 8 times faster than standard quartz. The result is a second hand that sweeps in one continuous, buttery motion instead of the familiar quartz tick, paired with an accuracy of roughly 10 seconds a year. For comparison, Grand Seiko's flagship 9F quartz caliber, the movement serious collectors chase inside watches costing $4,000 and up, claims that exact same figure on its own spec sheet. Grand Seiko gets there largely by hand-selecting and aging its own quartz crystals before they ever reach a case. Bulova gets there by changing the crystal's shape entirely. Two completely different roads arriving at the identical destination, one of them costing roughly 40 times what the other does at a Walmart marketplace listing. Bulova didn't build this alone, either. The movement came out of a partnership with Miyota, the movement manufacturer owned by Citizen, which had acquired Bulova outright back in 2008. That parentage matters more than it first appears to. Citizen is the largest watch manufacturer on the planet by volume, and the Precisionist is effectively flagship-grade Japanese quartz engineering. Quietly wearing an American brand name, most Walmart shoppers still associate with the clock hanging in their grandmother's hallway. Not every Precisionist on the market runs identically, and it's worth saying plainly. Some models use a detuned version at half the tick rate to conserve battery life. A wrinkle serious owners have argued about on forums for years, comparing serial numbers and caseback markings to figure out exactly which version they own. But the core technology, that three-pronged crystal itself, sits underneath every model in the family, regardless of which variant made it into your particular listing. Look for the caseback marking. Bulova stamps 262 kHz directly onto the dial or the caseback of the tuned models, alongside a small UHF logo, a rare case of a budget-adjacent brand actually telling you exactly what you're getting instead of hiding the spec sheet behind marketing language. Honestly, this is the entry I keep second-guessing myself on, because hidden engineering is exactly the kind of claim that tends to sound better than it should on paper. But the specification itself is public record. The comparison to Grand Seiko is public record too, printed by Bulova's own materials without much fanfare. And the price gap between a Precisionist bought through a Walmart marketplace listing and that same underlying movement sitting inside a boutique display case is real, checkable in about 90 seconds, and doesn't require trusting a single word of marketing copy along the way. What makes the whole thing land harder is the tuning fork logo stamped quietly on the caseback. Bulova has leaned on that same tuning fork imagery since the 1960s, when its earlier electronic movements first broke from the standard mechanical balance wheel entirely. The Precisionist isn't a nostalgia act borrowing an old badge for warmth. It's the same engineering obsession decades later, solved with a completely different piece of physics. Sitting on a marketplace listing, most shoppers scroll straight past on their way to something with a more recognizable name attached. Citizen didn't buy Bulova to shut it down or strip it for parts, either, which is worth noting given how often an acquisition like that ends with a brand slowly hollowed out until the name is all that's left. Instead, Bulova kept its own design language, its own factories in some product lines, and gained direct access to movement research. Most standalone American brands could never fund on their own. The Precisionist is arguably the clearest proof that arrangement actually paid off on both sides of the deal. Bulova hid genuine engineering behind an unglamorous grandmother clock kind of name. The last brand on this list hid something else entirely, its own home address. Number 1. George. Every watch on this list belongs to someone else. Skame belongs to a factory. Olevs belongs to a marketing department. U.S. Polo Assen belongs to a licensing office that has never once touched a movement. But George belongs to Walmart itself. And in October 2005, Walmart handed the design of its own house watch brand to Fossil. Not a knockoff of Fossil. Fossil, the actual publicly traded company. The same manufacturer that designs and builds watches sold at Macy's, at Nordstrom, and inside its own boutiques, brought in to construct George from the ground up, men's and women's lines. Japanese quartz movements, sapphire crystal on select models, genuine stainless steel cases, suggested retail pricing between $33 and $60. George itself started life years earlier as a British import, a private clothing label Walmart had inherited through its Asda subsidiary in the United Kingdom, expanded stateside into a full department, and finally handed over to a real watchmaker to build out properly. The partnership launched inside 550 Walmart stores, with more added across the following year. A Fossil executive at the time called it a real opportunity to grow George within the watch category specifically. A forum member on Watch You Seek, who stumbled onto one by accident a few years later, described picking it up, expecting yet another glued-together knockoff, and instead finding a working chronograph with a surprisingly solid feel for $30 in what he called initial quality, good enough to change his opinion of the whole aisle. Other Fossil-era George pieces, he added, ran Japanese movements under sapphire crystal, a spec sheet that had no business sitting on a Walmart shelf at that price at all. That was 2 decades ago, and here is the pivot the whole story turns on. Walk through Walmart's George listings today, and the price tags tell an entirely different story. $7.99, $9.59, $11.98. Chronograph-style dials that don't actually function as chronographs at all. What watch retailers call faux chronographs. Decorative subdials frozen in place, styled to resemble a complication nobody actually paid for or received. The George line still carries the words Walmart exclusive proudly across the listing page. What it no longer carries anywhere is confirmation that Fossil remains the one building it. So which George do you actually want? The one from the mid-2000s, when the brand's entire pitch rested on borrowed credibility from an established watchmaker. Stainless steel case, sapphire crystal, a name behind the name that meant something concrete to whoever sold it to you. Or the one sitting on the shelf today, origin unclear, $7 and change, a dial pretending to do more than it does for anyone who looks closely. Here's what nobody standing in that aisle ever tells you. You are not choosing between 2 watches that happen to share a name. You are choosing between 2 entirely different decades of the same brand, and only one of those decades was ever a gold mine worth digging for. There's a broader pattern worth naming before we close this out. Fossil itself has run into hard years since 2005, cutting product lines and shrinking its retail footprint as the wider fashion watch category cooled off. Whatever the current state of the George partnership actually is, and Walmart doesn't publish that answer for anyone browsing the listing, the mid-2000s pieces represent a specific window when a serious watchmaker built a budget house brand with genuine components instead of a licensing shortcut. Windows like that don't advertise themselves. They just sit in resale listings, secondhand shops, and the back of somebody's dresser drawer, waiting for a buyer who knows enough to check the case back instead of the price tag alone. The people who found real value in George didn't get lucky picking a random watch off a crowded shelf. They understood something the other 6 brands on this list also prove, each in its own particular way, over and over again. The name printed on the dial tells you almost nothing on its own. The paperwork sitting behind that name tells you everything you need to know. Which of these 7 have you actually owned? Let me know in the comments, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.